This is a very important conference on the defense of community colleges, which is a basic educational institution for working people of California, and we need to defend it as a basic right for working people and their children in California. I just returned last week from Turkey. We have a labor festival there and a labor communication conference, and interestingly enough, when I was there, I interviewed some Turkish union activists and other students about a guy called Abdullah Gulen. I don't know if any of you have heard of Gulen, the Gulen School, but it turns out that there's an Islamic cultist who runs the largest chain of schools, charter schools in the United States. And these schools are being supported by politicians. They get money from the federal government, and in Sacramento, for example, they're closing public schools while they're open Gulen schools. This is an international struggle. Privatization of education and destruction of public education is not just happening here, it's happening in Turkey, Chile, and around the world. So we have to look at this as an international struggle, and we have to look at the ideology of privatization and destruction of public education, and who is doing it, who is benefiting from it. Because they really see our schools, our public schools in California as profit centers. That's how they look at it. How can we make profit off of education? How can we basically off the students and also have them go into debt for hundreds of thousands of dollars? This is how they approach education. And they don't do it only here, they do it in Turkey and around the world. So we have a panel today. Our first speaker is going to be Madeline Mueller. Madeline is an activist. She's also a professor of music at San Francisco Community College and a member of AFT 2121. And welcome, Madeline Mueller.
Well, for the last couple of days, I've been in bed with a cold, so I didn't know if I'd make it today. I don't know if I'll make it much of today. But I had to come in to bring a lot of handout sheets back of the room. Please take them off my hands. I have had people say to me, because I tend to print things a lot, that's okay, because sometimes I find wonderful things with search engines, and then I go back for them and they're gone. So I print out everything so that nothing disappears, and I suggest you all keep your trails as well. Because I had all the sheets and I thought, what could I say about them? Last night in a very fevered state, I wrote a kind of outline of what handout sheets represent. There we go. I call this the M. Mueller Hall of Shame. And there are 18, actually, shames that I call out to people. The biggest shame goes to everyone who believes in the new version of Golden Rule. He who has the gold rules. Shame, number 2, shame on anyone who believes that education is not a necessity and responsibility for all humans at all ages. Number 3, shame on all the private foundations who are using their money to buy and make profits from turning public education into private education. 4, shame on major media for being owned and manipulated by large private interest groups. For example, the Kaplan University, a private for-profit college which owns the majority of shares in the Washington Post. 5, shame on data resource entities who are also paid for by large private groups to negatively manipulate data into, quotes, data-driven witch hunts against public schools and colleges. Number 6, shame on college accrediting agencies for accepting up to $2 million private dollars to conspire to destroy higher education while setting up virtual private colleges. 7, shame on ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, for at least 30 years, which for at least 30 years has successfully pushed anti-education bills through many state legislators, including several bills in California, all paid for by many corporate interests, especially big oil. Shame, number 8, shame on the Lumina Foundation. Its money and board members are primarily from Sallie Mae, a student loan provider, for pretending to help the poor and people in color, but actually entrapping a lifelong student debt. Number 9, shame on the completion mafia, that's what it's being called these days, which are the above, whose false claims of good jobs, which are never specified, but these can't be, good jobs awaiting those college students who must get in and out of college as fast as possible. Part-time students with part-time jobs are discouraged. and must get in and out with as much student debt as possible. This has led to the current $1 trillion+ of public student loan indebtedness. Number 10, shame on all for-profit colleges and universities who aggressively prey on the poor, veterans, and minorities, sign them into federal student loan programs. By the way, 90% of for-profit college budgets can be paid for by federal student loans. And when the students find that degrees from these for-profit schools are usually worthless, the students are financially ruined for life. The for-profit schools and their backers didn't get the money back from American taxpayers who are the underwriters of such loans. 11, shame on the many Democratic politicians who gain, usually through their spouses, much income from for-profit colleges and charter schools, and shame on the many Republicans who do the same thing, especially the Bush family who has cornered the market in the testing and virtual education trade. 13, shame on the most recent American presidents for selling out what all other nations acknowledge as the best higher education system in the world. Training college students only for jobs, probably low-paying jobs if they even exist, may help the 1% get richer, but it is obviously exploitive of everyone else. 14, shame on Secretary of Education Arne Duncan for applying, quote, shock doctrine, which my understanding is kick when they're down, techniques in dismantling public schools throughout America. Shame on anyone who pushes testing as validating standards, whose standards, in an attempt to undermine creativity, free thought, individuality, and basic human rights and needs. I have a handout sheet back there about grade schools and high schools in Finland, for example, who always at the top of international tests, the students when they graduate, but are never given standard tests while in school. 16, shame on the Chancellor and the Board of Governors of the California Community Colleges who are jamming through reforms, i.e. destroying, the world-acclaimed California Community Colleges, and are doing so funded by all of the above shameful people. A few years ago, Chancellor Scott even tried to outsource some California Community College courses to the criminally exploitive Kaplan College. Shame on Governor Brown for not protecting his father's legacy of the California Master Plan, admired throughout the world. California is a very rich state. A tax on oil, like those in Alaska and Texas, which pay for higher education in those states, would pay for all California education with money to spare. Yet Governor Brown has not supported this very fair source of income to California. It's our land, our oil, after all. So what will be Governor Brown's legacy? The last time he was governor, he left us the fallout from Proposition 13 because he couldn't figure out what to do with the obscene surplus of the time. 18, shame, and this is my conclusion, shame on the American public for swallowing all this. Despite lip service decrying the modern robber barons, we follow them like sheep. If Bill Gates were just a regular person without 50 or 60 billion, would we listen at all to what he says will reform education? So why should we listen to him because he has money? And are we so ready to turn our entire public school system over to charter schools because charter schools can, without any oversight, be separate but equal segregated schools, and because America is still bigoted and racist society? Are we eager to demonize K-12 public school teachers because most are women? We are still such a sexist society, resent that uppity women have jobs during hard times? And are we so ready to dismantle the most admired higher educational system in the world because we can't tolerate those, quotes, pointy-headed liberal professors filling the youth with the possibility of independent thought and self-actualization? Shame on those who pretend that anyone opposed to all these vile goings-on is just some kind of fossil who can't tolerate change. Destruction and privateering and exploitation is not change for the better. Rather, it's a regression of American society to meaner times.
So, thank you, Madeline, and she said a lot in a short statement. The United Public Workers of Action, which has helped host the panel, was formed in 2008 to defend public services, public education, and to unite all public workers in California and the United States. There are 1.5 million public workers in California. And one of the problems is they're all divided up by different districts, different counties, different city workers. And we see the necessity of uniting all public workers in California so we can fight collectively as workers in Europe and many other places do, where all public workers go out together with students. And I understand today in Montreal, the students of Quebec are being joined by the public workers of Quebec, who see the struggle to defend public education as a human right, a basic right for all public workers and the population as a whole. So our next speaker, he's a professor at Skyline College. He's on the steering committee of United Public Workers for Action, and also he's the author of some very important papers about privatization and education and the attack on public workers, which are on the UPWA table. So without further ado, welcome George Wright. He's a professor at Skyline College.
Steve told me I only have 10 minutes. I don't know if it's humanly possible for me to say anything in just 10 minutes, but we'll do our best. What I'd like to talk about is to kind of frame what Madeline laid out a little bit in some kind of historical and political context or perspective. First of all, just a brief biographical sketch, because I think this is very important related to the setting that we're in now. I consider myself a child of the California Master Plan for Higher Education. I graduated from high school in 1962, attended LA Harbor Community College. The tuition was $7.50 for 15 units. I transferred to Cal State Chico. Actually, it was Chico State in '64. Tuition was $47.50. I got a BA, MA, and a teaching credential. And what that plan was about was free and open or accessible education. And coming from African-American working class roots, I was able to get a university education that was very inexpensive. When I graduated, actually after I got my MA, I think I was $2,000 in debt at 3% interest, okay? Just to give you some idea of how it was then. From that position, I was able to teach in the state college system for some 35 years, and I'm currently teaching at the community college. So I've got now almost 50 years, it's hard to believe that, 50 years of perspective within the public system in the United States. That's post-high school. Obviously, I went to public schools as well. So what I'd like to do from that vantage point, I'd like to make a set of comments. First of all, since the 1970s, there's been a persistent assault on public education. I've watched it over the years and have been subject to that on personal and group levels. But what we do know is since the so-called financial economic crisis of 2008, that assault has accelerated. And in fact, it feels like neoliberalism on steroids has happened, okay? And history obviously has accelerated. What happened at that point is that dominant interests, the political establishment, the right wing, et cetera, obviously took advantage of that opening and has accelerated the attack on the public sector. We want to make a footnote real quick, is the ideological framework of this is neoliberalism, which is the hegemonic ideology at this particular historical moment. And the traits of neoliberalism are cutting taxes for the wealthy, deregulating the economy, rolling back the public services and public and social welfare programs, privatizing the public sector, and busting unions. This has been the hegemonic ideology since 1980 when Reagan was elected. And what we've seen is a persistent implementation of these guidelines to the benefit of corporate capitalism or transnational monopoly capitalism, whatever you want to define it. What we want to also say is that in 2008, the working class students, the poor, the disabled, youth, et cetera, were not prepared for this acceleration of neoliberalism on steroids. We weren't organized, we were fragmented, and we were, I would argue, somewhat confused about what was going on. That confusion was amplified by the campaign of Barack Obama, where many, many people felt that Obama was going to be the Messiah, kind of a morphing of Dr. King and Jack Kennedy, that he was going to save us and pursue a progressive and populist agenda. But that was not the case. We should have been aware that he wouldn't have even been in this position if he was of that position. So there was kind of an impotency at that particular moment. It took almost 3 years for some kind of mobilization. Students on the UC system in the fall of, 2010, Wisconsin last winter, and obviously the great Occupy emerged in September. But is it too late? We'll have to figure that out ourselves. What I'd like to say is I have a number of observations that I think are very important that we all should be aware of to establish kind of the context that we're operating in, because to act in and of itself could be self-defeating if we don't know who the enemy is and we don't know what the realities are. So of the many points that could be made, I'd like to just make a couple. One, the assault on public education, and specifically, and the public sector in general, is not simply bipartisan political policy, but is dictated by the imperative of capital, meaning dominant economic interests, Wall Street, corporations, affiliated foundations, the corporate media as well, to maximize profit. In fact, that privatization level is part of the current profit accumulation model. And obviously the label for that is austerity. The austerity project is aimed to, one, transfer wealth from the public sector and workers to the top 1%, and two, to force the working class to pay for the financial crisis that Wall Street and the political establishment created. Just to give you an idea of the pool of money that's out there related to public education, in 2010, education expenditures represented 5.6% of the gross national product. If you want to put that in dollar figures, in 2006, some $514 billion was spent on education. $292 billion of that was for classroom use. So there's a tremendous amount of money to be made related to the capital accumulation process. The next point I want to make is that the Democratic Party, the Obama administration, and the trade union bureaucracy are agents of the neoliberal project, and therefore cannot be considered vehicles or agents for progressive change, or for that matter, even preserving the perceived status quo. I think that's a hard-learned lesson, but increasingly people are becoming aware of that. But how that is addressed is again, something that this conference can address throughout the day. And the final point I want to make before I make some brief conclusions is I noticed that the posters around the wall talk about refunding education. I'm number one in supporting the refunding education. Don't get me wrong. But what we have to realize that refunding education will not alter or dent the corporatization, privatization of public education project. It will also not dent the neoliberal profit accumulation model. Public education must be redefined to serve society within the context of a complex transformation of the society. So in and of itself, refunding is not just the solution, because the project of privatization is going to continue. The job situation, unemployment, the neoliberal policies will continue. So it is only part of the solution. Now, what must be done? Steve has referred to creating mass-based, unified coalitions. Obviously, we need to come up with counter-hegemonic programs and ideas. They're on the table. They're out there. We need to bring them together. And finally, I'd like to quote the great political theorist James Petrus, who recently explained the predicament the working class, youth, and the elderly and the disabled faced. Quote, prolonged economic crises and a never-ending downward spiral in living standards fueled by class-based austerity programs designed to reduce wages and social benefit and increase profits. We're not going back to the Keynesian golden age with those people in power. Petrus concludes, and I think this is a very, very important observation. In response, emerging mass social movements are playing a dominant role within the anti-capitalist opposition. Obviously, this is international, as Steve referred. And this final sentence is something we need to consider very, very strongly related to what kind of tactics we need to use. Direct action is gradually overshadowing electoral politics. I'm going to read that again. Direct action is gradually overshadowing electoral politics, moving over time from protests and rebellions towards overt struggles for state power. Thank you.
I just want to say one quick thing. I know there's like a bit of noise in the background.
One of the things I wanted to point out to brothers and sisters here is that California is one of the richest places in the world. Richest places in the world. In the city of San Francisco, there are 16 billionaires. 16 billionaires. In California, there are 88 billionaires. 88 billionaires are in California.
We got 93.
93? It's gone up. I guess the Facebook IPO just came out, so that raised it to 93. And I think one of the tasks we have in this conference and in the future is to educate the people of California in our communities. The money is here. It is here. It's in San Francisco. It's in Los Angeles. It's all over the state. We don't have to go anyplace. It's right here. We have to get it. And we have to educate people about the wealth of California and why it's not going to the working people and the students of California. And we have to make it happen so it will come to us, and we have to take it. And these people are going to stop us, try to stop us, and have been stopping us to take what's rightfully ours. So the next speaker is very important. Her name is Kathleen Carroll. And Kathleen was an attorney at the Commission on Teacher Credentials. She began to speak out about criminal corruption, conflicts of interest, because the privatization and the destruction of public education is not just a bad policy, it's not just a mistake, it's a criminal act by people who are criminally profiting from the destruction of public education. She spoke out, she was fired and terminated, she's fighting for justice, and she's drawing the dots of who these people are. So welcome, Kathleen Carroll.
Hi, thank you for having me. Yes, I became a whistleblower in 2010, and I initiated a state audit against the California Commission on Teacher Credentialing. And the audit really did not do justice to what I was reporting. There was numerous statutory violations, violation of due process to teachers, and yes, conflicts. And I'm glad Professor Wright talked about the issue not being refunding public education. What we need to do is stop defunding public education and keep it public. We need to We need to repeal charter school laws. We need to stop our taxpayer dollars to going for-profit colleges. Many of you may or may not know that our tax dollars are going through nonprofit entities that are tax exempt, and they're being collaborating with lobbyists. School districts are hiring lobbyists. Community college districts have hired lobbyists. They all have different lobbyists. And some of these lobby firms, in addition to having traditional public schools, such as the community colleges, the CSU and the UC, and the school districts, traditional school districts, have companies like K-12 Inc., Pearson, Halliburton, ATT, Boeing, World Oil Corporation, Chevron. These are conflicts. So it's no surprise that this is happening. The conflicts are there, and since I have been terminated in 2010, I have met and talked to people literally across the country. My attorney was getting calls from community college faculty members who wanted to speak to me anonymously, and they were telling me horrific stories. Part-time faculty members were telling me they were doing summer projects with companies in India for software for English language learners. One was convicted in the Los Angeles Community College. Her name was Dr. Tammy Robinson, and that's public record, so I'm not disclosing anything. But there was a company called EducoSoft with holdings all around the world. And she said that this information that they were doing were mandating the students to sign up, subscribe to this software program, pay for all the materials, when this material was publicly and freely available online already. Horrible, and she was convicted, but she took a fall when numerous other heads should have rolled. A lot was already covered. The doctrine, the shock and awe phenomena was mentioned today, and I highly recommend, if you haven't already, read Naomi Klein's book, The Shock Doctrine. It really goes into the heart and soul of what is called disaster capitalism and what our government has been capable of in the name of capitalism and profit-making. And it'll turn your stomach. We've killed people. Our government has killed people in the name of profit. We have falsified crises all over the world in the name of profit. And we're doing it now here in this country. The government is saying that there's this horrible, horrible crisis. Well, there is no crisis. The crisis is they want to destabilize public education so they can justify all these friggin' changes. Excuse my language. We don't need changes. We need the funding to be there. We need quality educators in the classroom. We need quality education and access for all. And the profiteers don't want that. They don't want community college to be accessible and affordable to all. They want to carve out profit. And the Institute for Higher Education Leadership and Policy, which is located at Sacramento State and funded by Lumina and ALEC, was doing just that. They're the ones that drafted your student success task force recommendations to destroy community colleges. So you have to choose a major your first year. You have to cookie cutter out what you decide to do with your life. You don't get to choose. Is that democracy? Hell no. That's not democracy. You may have read in the Inside Higher Ed that Chancellor Jack Scott will be retiring in August. Some of you may clap. But be careful, because the Board of Governors gets to choose the next chancellor. And the Board of Governors, one of which used to be a commissioner on the Commission on Teacher Credentialing, so all the people I've met, we are all interconnected. Governor officials at the state level, our state assembly members, our senators, our school board members, our board of governors, our CSU trustees. One of the CSU trustees is Margaret Fortune. She's a charter school founder. They're all infiltrated. They're infiltrated in the community colleges. They're infiltrated in CSU. They'll infiltrated in UC. They'll infiltrated on the traditional school boards. There are active lobbyists who represent business interests who are elected school board members, and that is illegal. And no one's doing anything about it. I worked with Steve on drafting a letter to Kamala Harris. He has not since, and that was sent last December. He has yet to receive a response, and he sent it certified return receipt. So she hasn't done anything. We need to demand that our tax dollars no longer go to these business interests, and there are many of them. That's the solution. We need to have an initiative that stops the bloodshed of money flowing to these entities. That's the crisis. And Brown doesn't want us to know that. Why? Because those business interests are funding their campaign coffers. That's why they're not talking about that. His tax initiative is horrific. It would give sole discretion on funding to charter school operators, to the chancellor's office. It is literally horrific. I've been up in Sacramento. I have seen the politics. I have seen the corruption. I don't know if Sharon Higgins is here today, but she has a blog called Charter School Scandals, and on it, there's numerous scandals and corruption, and millions, and I'm talking hundreds of millions of dollars have been embezzled from the state of California through taking money, through profiteering, and a lot of people end up going to Nevada, and you may not know this, but there's no income tax in Nevada, and that's why they end up living there. But I have met whistleblowers from across the state that have talked to me about all the corruption, pensions spiking their salaries, board members looking the other way. Why? Because they have business interests. They're all their cronies and their family members, they're all in it together. This is a very tightly interwoven web of business corruption, and we absolutely have to stop it. I brought some articles too, but I didn't make copies. But I did want to say The Nation had a great article on selling schools out, the scam of virtual education. The author is Lee Fang. In it, it really is kind of a roadmap as to what's going on and why they're really trying to push technology into schools. It's not to make education more quality. Educators make education. Educators and your classmates make education quality, not a computer avatar. And some of them are being outsourced outside the country, which you may not know. So we need to really stop this. And another battle that's brewing in Sacramento now is Senator Steinberg is trying to end the initiative process. Literally end it, and he's going to have a meeting in May 20th in Sacramento. We don't want that. He's trying to say, well, the Republicans co-opted the initiative process and all these money makers. Well, but who co-opted it? Brown. He got 1.5 million signatures in a month and a half. A pretty amazing feat. I also think we should demand to have an independent verification and count of those signatures, because it was over 843,000 signatures he had to get in that very short amount of time. So I think we should demand an independent verification, making sure there's no duplications and there actually is that amount.
So I want to thank you, Kathy, and if you go to Kathy Carroll, and you can go on YouTube, she's given Kathleen Carroll, you can find her presentations and speeches about the attack on public education. And as she said, we sent a letter to Kamala Harris, the Attorney General, asking her to investigate the conflict of interest, the criminal financial conflicts of interest that these privatizers have in California. They're criminal conflicts of interest. Not one word from Kamala Harris. And maybe we need a couple of thousand students and educators in front of her office in Sacramento. Do your job. Do your job. When people steal from students, when they steal from public education, they have to be held accountable like you and I are held accountable. If we steal, we go to jail. And these people who are stealing from the public, from students in public education, and who have conflicts of interest, they need to go to jail. They need to go to jail. It's not a game. They're destroying lives. And we know that the students in this state are being destroyed. Their futures are being destroyed. It's about the lives of the future of the people of California. We cannot accept it. It's intolerable, and we have the money to stop it. So we are also going to we have some resolutions for a statewide International Day of Action on October 5th, which is International Day for Teacher and Education. Also calling for the prosecution of the conflicts of interest by financial, basically, profiteers in education in California, and also for statewide action of all students and public workers. We have to unite all the public workers of California and all the students to fight back in a united way. We have the power in California. In 1934, there was a general strike in San Francisco. Hundreds of thousands of workers joined unions. The city was shut down for the right to have a union. In 1934. In 1946, there was a general strike in Oakland. Now, if they can have a general strike for the right to have a union, we need a general strike for the right to education. Public education. Because that's exactly what they are taking away. They're taking away our right to a public education. This is a life and death issue for all of us and the people of California, the people of the country, and the people of the world. We need more education, not less education, and we have to fight for it. So I want to thank you. If there are any questions, or no time for questions, thank you very much, and solidarity will continue the fight.